This is Colin Brown from Woodburn Rising. Today is January the 15th, 2014. I buried one of my friends today, Mr. Robert Lincoln Hurst, who died at the age of 93 last January the 7th. Bob Hurst was one of the grand folk of Woodburn, who was a passionate, exciting, and friendly man who loved everybody he knew.
Hi, I'm Bob Hurst again in Aurora, Oregon, place where I was born. Now, I want to tell you about one of the things that happened that was quite unusual in our little town of Aurora. We had a very good man in town here, or he lived right on the edge of town. His name was Lester Grazier, and he was the type of man that would help anybody in need, and he did many, many times. But Les had one problem, and that was he liked to go to the tavern pretty well in the evening when he wasn't working. And sometimes he'd take on a little bit more beer than what he could handle. And this one evening, he left the tavern, drove down across the railroad track as a train came along and hit him squarely. It knocked his car, and he would be a little bit northwest of the railroad track in a hole there. It was right next to the hardware store. And Dr. Renfrew came along and went down and saw him and pronounced him dead. About 10 minutes later, Doc Geesey gets down there. He walks up to him. Now, Doc knew Les real well. And he says, "How you doing, Les?" He says, "Pretty good, Doc." And they took him to the hospital. I don't know how many stitches they put in him, but his face was just a mass of cuts. And he wore those scars all of his life after that. But he seemed not too long a time, he was back to work again, doing his good things. I'll always remember Les, for my father had a little place down by the railroad track too, and he had a man that had helped him out. His name was Pat Cavanaugh, and he'd helped my father along a lot of times. But Pat had never saved any money, and he didn't have a place to live as he got older. So my dad had Les help him, and I don't think Les charged my dad any money, and they built a cabin for Pat down on my dad's property. Well, I was up on the roof helping Les shingle the roof, and my dad was working there too, and a fella come along and he says, my father's name was Ezra, and he says, "Ezra, why are you doing this for that damned old drunk?" Well, Pat did drink a little bit, and in fact at times he drank too much. And Dad says, "Well, George, I'll tell you, if he had lots of money, I imagine a lot of people would help him." And it made me feel so proud of my father that he was willing to help someone when they were down and out. But that is not an unusual thing in this town of Aurora, because I know Jonas Will and Percy Will, who had the grocery store, and Arthur Krause that had the other grocery store. They helped many, many people and were never rewarded for what they did for them and helping them with their groceries. But it makes me feel that I'm really proud that I grew up in this town. Hi, this is Bob Hurst again from Aurora, Oregon. I've been talking quite a little while now about Aurora, and I believe one of the largest events that I could remember in Aurora that wasn't quite as big as the Aurora Colony days that we've just had, but it was a big event, and that was the Aurora 100th year centennial. Now we put out this book, and that was the way we raised revenue to put this show on, by selling each book. I think we sold the books for $1 each, which seemed to be quite a bit of money in 1956. And although we sold quite a few of them, we had quite a few left over. And over at the museum, they had quite a few of them to sell for quite a while, but I think they're out of them now. But this centennial was put on truly by local talent, and a lady that lived here in town, Mrs. Ben Stoner, known as Madge, wrote a story about coming west, and we built a platform up by their park, which is just south of the main part of town, and we built a stage there, and we drove the covered wagons right over the stage, and it was quite a nice event, and we figured it was attended by about 5,000 people, and the whole thing lasted 3 days, and everybody seemed to have a big time. We also had a carnival in town then, and we had the sheriff of Clackamas County roasted beef that we'd put down in the ground, and they had this down in the ground roasting all night underground, which made a it was very tender, very juicy, and very tasty sandwich that we served the next day. Everybody in town took part in it, and it was all local talent, and we selected a queen and her court, and it so happened that my mother happened to be the queen of the centennial, and I think she did a great job as queen. And her sister, Hattie, was also on the court. When we selected the queen, it was by popular vote, and she had to be over 65 years old and had to be a descendant of the Aurora colony. And so there was Mrs. Bradle and Orletta Krause, and I think that was Orletta Krause, Mrs. Bradle, my mother, her sister Hattie, and I think they were the ones that were on the court that were eligible to be. And the ex-governor of Oregon crowned my mother queen, and it happened that my young son, who at that time was 6 years old, was the crown bearer, and brought it in, and he was dressed with a long swallowtail black coat and a top hat, and it looked quite cute, and my mother was very, very happy. Can you cut it? Can you cut it? It was Governor Sprague that crowned my mother, and we were very happy for that. And then Governor Smith, who was an acting governor for a short time, he was also there for the centennial, and it made us very happy to have him there. Governor Smith was a newspaper man before he became governor in Albany, Oregon, and he was only governor for a short while. But the event was very, very well attended, and everyone left very happy. And that was one of the most important things in my lifetime. But we did have one other event that happened that gave Aurora quite a bit of publicity, and that is a sea lion that came in from the ocean up the Columbia River, up the Willamette River, to the Pudding River, and up the Pudding River, and across the field, just right close to the airport on the Boone's Ferry Road. And it was right close to the highway, and it was discovered by Harold Evans, who happened to work for the Portland General Electric Company. And he came into town and told us about it, and they got, all the kids got out of school around to come and see that sea lion. And that was quite an event. And
the accountant.
Hi, this is Bob Hurst again, talking about Aurora, Oregon. In 1918, my father bought his first truck. He had always had horses before that. And of course, they were solid tire trucks. And as I remember, the trucks were all solid tired up until about, I know I have a picture of a 1923 Federal truck, and it had solid tires on it. And I think the trucks all had solid tires up until about 1924 or 25. The cars, though, they had pneumatic tires for cars at that time. They were called pneumatic tires, or tires that had air in them. But in this town, there weren't too many cars, but there was a man that sold Overland cars, and he lived right down at the end of this street, straight east of the museum. And his name was Frank Miller, and he was the first car dealer I ever knew. And that's all he sold was Overlands. And of course they were an open car. And I know one time my dad rented a car from Fred, and we went to the coast about 1926. And we went over the 4th of July, and we had a tent strapped onto the running board on the driver's side, so the driver couldn't get out, or a passenger couldn't get out. And it was a open car, had a roof over it, but side curtains on it. And I don't remember how long it took us to get to Taft, Oregon, is where we went, but I suppose it took between 3 and 4 hours to go over there. And that was a big thing for me, the first time I'd ever seen the ocean. And I really enjoyed that. I was probably about 6 years old then. And my two sisters and I and my mother and father went over. And I remember my dad caught crab, and I sure enjoyed eating that crab. I think that was about the first crab I ever ate. But in town here, Henry Ziegler had the warehouse down. The building is still there now on the south side of town, and the north side of town. And I can remember the farmers used to haul all of their grain in sacks into the warehouse, where the Zieglers would clean the seed and either buy it or store it for the farmer. And every once in a while, maybe twice in my life, this happened. There'd be a runaway where the horses were standing there and they decided to take off. I can't remember of anybody getting hurt. I remember one wagon that did turn over, and they finally stopped the horses. But then there'd be fewer horses every year from then on, and after about probably 1930, I don't remember many people coming to town with horses, except for Jim Snyder. And Jim Snyder lived right straight up the street from the museum, up Liberty Street. And he had a big red barn, and he always had two nice horses. And Jim would have woodcutters cut wood, and he'd sell wood all around town and would haul it to town in his wagon. And it just seems now, as I look out from here and look up the street, like I should see Jim Snyder going up the street with his horses and wagon. Hi, this is Bob again, talking about Aurora. Colin just asked me what we did for food. He said there wasn't many supermarkets in, and he's certainly true, but we had two good stores in this town. But when it came to produce, milk, and eggs, I think the first milk route I can remember in town was had by people by the name of Steinhoffs. had a dairy that he delivered milk around to all the people in town. And then after that, Logue Snyder had a dairy, and he delivered milk to everybody in town. And a lot of people had cows of their own. And Colin asked me if I ever milked a cow. Yes, I did, but it was later in life. My father had a cow after he had retired. And if my father went deer hunting or something, well, I milked the cow for him while he was gone. And about everybody in town had a chicken house and had chickens. So I'm going to tell you a story about chickens. There was a fella who had one chicken, and every morning he'd go out to the chicken house and he'd lift the hen up off the nest and he'd have an egg there. But this one day he went out, he lifted the chicken off the nest, and there wasn't any egg. So but there was a penny there. The next day he went out, lifted the chicken up, there wasn't any egg again, but there was a nickel there. The next day he went out, lifted the hen up, no egg again, but there was a dime there. So he got scared, and he liked that hen very much, so he took it to the veterinary. And the veterinary looked the chicken over and said, well, there's nothing wrong with your hen. She's just going through the change. And that's about all of my chicken stories.
Three.
Hi, this is Bob again talking about Aurora. Colin asked me, he says, what about the churches in Aurora? Well, we've always had, as long as I remember anyway, we've had two churches, the Lutheran Church and the Presbyterian Church. And the Lutheran Church has the largest congregation ever since I could remember. But I happened to go to the Presbyterian Church, and my family did. I'll always remember the Christmases when we went to church. Both churches, I think, always had a Christmas program, and all the kids were generally in the program that went to church. And at the end of the program, Santa Claus was always there to give you a bag of candy and nuts and an orange. And that always seemed like such a wonderful event on Christmas Eve. And as far as I know, Reverend Graffius was the first Presbyterian minister that I can remember. And of course there's been a lot of them since then. And the first minister in the Lutheran Church I remember was Reverend Shaler. And he had 3 daughters. But then after Reverend Shaler, there was the Reverend Knorr. And he had one son who I liked very well. He was younger than I, but he was a very likable boy. And I'll have one story to tell about Alfred Knorr. I lost track of him after his father moved, another minister came. And I never heard from Alfred anymore. But right after World War II, and I got home, I got a thing out of Seattle, Washington, to ask you to join the Naval Reserve. And in that was a little note, and it said, "Dear Bob, I saw this going to you, and I couldn't help but put a note in it. My name's Alfred Knorr, and I'm working in the Postal Department in Seattle, Washington." And that's the last I ever heard from Alfred, but I'd sure like to see him again. Hi, this is Bob Hurst again talking about Aurora, Oregon. Colin just asked me a question. He says, tell a little bit about your first date. Well, I can't hardly remember that far back, but I remember when I was going to grade school, there was a girl I liked very, very much, and her name was Anna McGinnis. And I think the first date I ever had was all the kids, she and I were in the same grade at school, and all the kids in our grades, about 4 grades, went to the capital of Salem to see the capital of the state of Oregon. And she and I got off somewhere by ourselves and went downtown, and I remember I bought her a bag of peanuts. that we both munched on, and also a bottle of pop. And boy, I thought that was a great day. And all my life, I just always thought an awful lot of Anna, but I never did see her very much after that. In case her brother and sister might see this, you know, I have to be awful sorry. I don't remember the sister's name, but I remember Eddie, her brother's name, who was younger than, both of these children were younger than her, and I think they're still living in Portland, and they're the only ones of the family that are still alive. But you know the old saying, when Ma was courting Pa, they didn't have any streamlined trains or aeroplanes, but they had plenty of country lanes, and that sure is true. I enjoyed many a country lanes. Hi, this is Bob Hurst again, and Colin just asked me to talk about the Aurora Museum and how it got started. Well, before the museum ever existed here, the building was empty, and my brother Norman and I were having quite a time about keeping up the building and wondering what to do with it because it was empty. So one day my brother was talking to a fella, and if I remember right, his name was Bob Bogue, and he said, well, you know, he said, that building would make a good museum. So he says, I know a man that, that might start it. And so he brought got a lady by the name of Mrs. Powers and a man by the name of Dr. Barker. Now, Dr. Barker was a doctor of education, and he was a history teacher at Portland State College. And they did come out and look at it. And then he got his daughter interested in it. Her name was Mrs. Sprouse of the Sprouse Wright stores. And they said, well, if we had some way of proving that it was a colony ox barn, they would be interested in starting a museum here, or helping one get started. And I guess we finally had proof enough that it was an ox barn. So through the efforts of Dr. Barker, Mrs. Sprouse and Mrs. Powers, we managed to get it going, and we were very happy to give it to the Historical Society for that purpose, for a selfish reason, and also to have a museum here, because we were afraid we might have to tear it down, and we didn't want to do that because of the upkeep so much. But right behind the ox barn today is an oak tree, and telling about in memory of Dr. Barker, because he did so much to get it started. But his daughter, Mrs. Sprouse, she just really did a lot and put a lot of money into it, and we can owe her a debt of thanks, and also Mrs. Powers for everything they did. And we were very sorry when they both had finally passed away. But besides getting it started, they also donated quite a few things to it. And everything helped, and they got us on the right start, too. And I'll always be grateful to them.